Hello and good evening. I'd like to welcome everyone to tonight's Thursday, Friday Fireside chat of the LaRouche organization for January 21st. And what I'm going to do tonight is to just read something I was just writing for the purpose of describing our Saturday meeting. It may not be the final text, but it's at least the idea that I want to offer as a way of thinking about how what we were confronted with. So it says, how in the aftermath of the banality of evil that was the Biden presidential inauguration, should we think in order to address what must now be done in the United States? Statesman Lyndon LaRouche, in his Politics as Art, pointed out that, and then this is a quote, President Lincoln had won a terrible, justified, and absolutely necessary war on behalf of all humanity by aid of lessons adduced from William Shakespeare, which he had taught as directives to the members of his cabinet. No one, friend or foe, laughed at the awesome result of that instruction. Now, since that's a story that a lot of people don't know, we may say something about it during the course of the evening. About Lincoln and his cabinet, that is, and William Shakespeare. The 26,000 National Guardsmen and 14,000 other law enforcement and Department of Defense personnel that deployed at the Biden-Harris presidential inauguration, a force the same size as the American military forces presently stationed in the nation of Germany, and more than those now deployed in South Korea, Afghanistan, and Iraq combined, were a massive, impressive display of mental weakness. The return of the Obama ancient regime was not met with roaring enthusiasm by anyone inside or outside of the United States. Minutes after the ceremony, 17 executive orders, including rejoining the Paris Climate Accords and revoking the Keystone XL pipeline, were passed. Deindustrialization, depopulation, and cultural decline are the future, unless war, including thermonuclear war, with either Russia, China, or both, suddenly shortens the winter of American discontent with a global warming of another kind. Poet Dante Alighieri, who died 700 years ago, invented the Italian language through a poem, the Commedia, sometimes called the Divine Comedy. His purpose was to transform his divided, desperate, and semi-literate countrymen into thinkers by giving them a language by means of which they might discuss profound and impassioned conceptions respecting man and nature. Building an American and indeed international Gideon's army of thinkers capable of discussing clearly, with pungency and force, the great tasks of humanity is our responsibility, our mission, and our topic for this Saturday's Manhattan Project discussion. And I would say it should also be the character of our topic tonight. So I think that's enough for me to say. And I'll just say that we're going to first hear from Diane Sare. She is a U.S. Senate candidate for 2022 against Chuck Schumer, who is the senator from Wall Street and also the Senate Majority Leader, who will be presiding over the impending impeachment trial, or one of the people that will seek to preside over the impending impeachment trial in the Senate of Donald Trump that will at some point be set. Not clear when that will be. It could be a month from now. It could be whatever. But what's relevant is that Diane's campaign has now assumed a different significance than it had prior to the events of the past 2 weeks. And so we're going to start off with her first, followed by Megan Beats. So, Diane?
Yes, thank you. I presume you can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. So we are in a rather amazing situation, I think, contrary to whatever people may be feeling. And I know the media is portraying the Trump supporters as enraged, ready to pick up arms and start a civil war, which seems to be what the Antifa people are doing in Portland, Oregon, but not elsewhere. But what I found is most of the people I know are talking about having a good beer, drowning their sorrows in chocolate lava cake, etc. And I would say that's not, it's all right to take a minute and regroup, but we actually have before us probably the most rich organizing potential that we have ever had. What you had with this so-called election was a complete farce. Over 75 million people did not vote for Joe Biden. I think it's questionable how many people actually did vote for him. And at any rate, already in 1987, Lyndon LaRouche had written a paper which we just republished in the EIR, which, by the way, everyone should subscribe to that publication. But LaRouche's 1987 paper was called "The Deeper Grounds for Philosophical Doubts Respecting the Existence of Joe Biden." Joe Biden was caught plagiarizing parts of his speech, I think on more than one occasion. And LaRouche writes here in this paper, near the close of this year's Major League Baseball season, plagiarist Joe Biden stepped up to score 2 fouls, followed by a wildly swinging third strike, and was then thrown out of the 1988 campaign for the Democratic presidential nomination. So much of Senator Biden is now attributed to be a carbon copy of other persons that a humorist might be forced to speculate whether or not Joe Biden were merely a computer-synthesized laser hologram pieced together out of entries taken from Bartlett's familiar quotations. Wit begs thus philosophical doubts that Senator Joe Biden actually exists. His birth certificate is probably genuine, but his public personality is an empty shell of borrowed rhetoric. So that was LaRouche's prescient and accurate description of Biden. I can say the 33 years since that was written, he has not improved, but become less existent than before. And apparently already today had some kind of crazy incident at a press conference where he lashed out because he's been bragging about how he's going to get to 1 million vaccines per day. But Trump already was at 980,000 plus per day. So this is not an escalation or some vast improvement. And a reporter happened to ask him about it. And Biden practically tore the guy's head off and said, "Come on, man, I'm just getting started." So he is not going to get very far before his complete lack of cognitive capabilities is evident. That's why they wanted Kamala Harris to be the vice president, because she is a notorious prosecutor with no morals or integrity. And the thing is just not going to work. Is not going to have the support of the American people or the all critical consent of the governed, which means that if we can quickly get over nursing our sorrows, if people have that problem, and get out there organizing, we are going to find that we're in a potential moment to recruit like crazy to Lyndon LaRouche's policies and the policies that are urgently needed to address this crisis. Just on sort of a humorous note to underscore this, I got a report tonight from someone who told one of our organizers, this person happens to be, I guess, in the National Guard and was deployed among the 26,000 to go to the Capitol and be there. And they said, contrary to normal procedure, the guardsmen surrounding President Biden and his wife and so on were ordered to turn their backs to them as opposed to facing them. And he said to the people next to him, "What, are we supposed to moon them?" And the whole line of guardsmen just started cracking up and could barely stay in position. So I think that's sort of the attitude to take toward this, accepting you must also bear in mind that it is deadly serious. As much as Pompeo was completely out of control, wanting war with China, war with Russia, condemning millions of people in Yemen to death by starvation, the people around Biden are at least as bad, if not worse. It is a very dangerous situation as far as the war goes, and frankly, as far as the pandemic goes. So what I wanted to just say, that much being said, is there's a few things I think we really have to think about. We have, of course, what Lynn has written on his 4 laws and his proposal for an emergency summit, a meeting of Russia, India, the U.S., and China, or at least the U.S., Russia, China, to address these crises. These things are absolutely urgent. We also have, which I think was really in evidence, and Dennis just addressed it with his comments or his invitation for the Saturday meeting, a horrific cultural collapse where you could have, the idea of what Biden had as so-called music, non-music, at his inauguration was like a scene from some kind of, I don't know what, horror movie or something. It sort of gives away everything that's wrong with the country, or how we could be at a point where we find ourselves with a person who is barely present as president of the United States. And you also see it in what happened with so many Americans, that people have lost the ability to reason through for themselves, to have trust in your mind that you can know whether something is true or not. And earlier today, I was reading the first book of Plato's Republic, and it's interesting because Socrates, of course, does not approach anything from the standpoint of quote unquote facts, but always by asking questions about whether something is true or not true, and depending upon the innate power of reason of the person to whom he is speaking. This is similar to what Einstein did in his experiments with the speed of light and imagining a train going at or near the speed of light, which of course you could not, it doesn't exist, at least right now, we don't have that. But being able to make fundamental scientific breakthroughs by imagining a physical situation. And that quality of thinking is something that we urgently have to return to, because you have people who, on the one hand, seem to be rational. They recognize that Trump took certain initiatives on getting our troops out of Iraq and Afghanistan, pulling us out of the Paris Climate Accord. But then, and Trump did a brilliant job in pushing through the vaccine warp speed. But the next thing you know, they say, I absolutely am not going to be vaccinated. You know, there's a microchip in there. And did you know wearing a face mask causes breast cancer? I mean, just the craziest things. Or what people fell into with this QAnon, where I don't know how many people actually thought that there were 400,000 sealed indictments. You know, really, the Facebook that has banned, Facebook and Twitter, which have banned the President of the United States from speaking to you, are going to tell you the truth about a secret plan, which can't be that secret if it's on Facebook and Twitter, about how all these people are going to be arrested and so on. Why would people fall into that trap? And this has been worked on, it's been designed, etc. So what I am thinking is a very good guide for a platform in terms of what has to be done immediately is actually from the Declaration of Independence, the inalienable rights that are listed there: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And there are three general areas of action because, one, the COVID pandemic has already taken the lives of over 400,000 people in the United States, over 2 million people worldwide. This really should not have happened. It is a result of 60 years of a takedown of our physical infrastructure, our healthcare system, and our scientific capability, and that globally. And LaRouche warned about this in the 70s. And if you're going to reverse it and address it, even with the vaccine, number one, until, and I don't know how quickly China's getting the vaccines to Peru, but they just sold, I think, 19 million doses or something to Peru. But as of 2 days ago, of 39 million doses of vaccine that had been administered, a total of 25, not 25 million, 25 had been given in any nation of the less developed sector, and all 25 of those doses were in the African nation of Guinea. So think about that, and can you really eradicate a disease in one part of the world if it's raging and mutating in other parts of the world? Because if you don't actually wipe it out, the danger is that you could develop new strains on which a vaccine would not have an effect. Also, if we don't develop the level of water management, power management, transportation, basic infrastructure to address this now, what happens when the next virus comes along? And there probably will be one, but it doesn't have to be a pandemic if we have this standard of living required. So we need a crash program to massively upgrade the infrastructure, both physical and the health infrastructure in the United States, but to do it also globally. And we have millions of young people who have not been able to go to school full-time or do other things, but who could be employed helping to work on this or do things that may involve work outdoors or things like that. If we were actually thinking from the standpoint of crushing this and saving lives, and not from the somewhat cynical standpoint, which seemed to affect most of the Western nations, not all of them. Some did better, like Norway and New Zealand, but most of the Western nations seem to take this kind of half-baked approach. Well, we'll let a few people die and we'll keep a few things open and we'll do 50% of this and 50% of that. And what you end up with is death rates of over 1,000 people per million population, which is what you have in the US. It's higher in the UK, it's higher in Italy, Spain, France, those kind of rates, where many Asian nations, instead of having 1,000 or 1,400 deaths per 1 million, have 5 deaths per million, or 13 deaths per million, or 4 deaths per million. It's a world of difference. So what's happened, the deaths that have occurred were not necessary, but we can take actions now that allow addressing the pandemic to actually be a driver to lift our economy to an entirely new and improved platform. Second, on this question of liberty, then I think something has to be done both on the big tech, the censorship. There have to be clearly defined laws protecting freedom of speech. We have to reassert the First Amendment. We should break up monopolies on this. I think some people are working on this. We have to find out more. Also, as people know, we've had a series of meetings on the question of truth in elections, because it's not enough for an election for someone to just say, oh, yes, we have a great system and the election is transparent. The observers and the American people have to have confidence that it is fair. Otherwise, you will have no confidence in your government. And this is urgent. It's also urgent because one of the reasons why Congress might be affected by having thousands of people show up at their town hall meetings demanding a policy is if the congressman knows that they have to be reelected and they need those votes. But if it doesn't matter if they get the votes because some voting machine or some bunch of suitcases is going to come in, and again, big tech and big money is going to decide the election no matter how the people actually vote, well, then you don't have that much. That's the lever of control that you don't have over these people who are supposed to represent you. So these things are very important. And then finally, on this question of the pursuit of happiness, we have to do something about the culture and we have to do something about education. And it should start young. And I actually think it is very urgent that every child, probably starting at least at the age of 6, be involved in a chorus, and shortly thereafter in an orchestra or a wind ensemble, because one, if you are singing or playing an instrument, you cannot hold your smartphone. You have to engage your mind and concentrate on what you're doing. And the beauty of musical performance is it is mental, spiritual, and also physical. It involves muscle training, muscle memory, and it is social. And you learn to interact with other people. And if we had a nation where we're once again creating classical musicians and composers, we would never have the monstrosity of Lady Gaga and Amazing Grace and what happened at this inauguration, or the kind of music, frankly, that they had at the January 6th Trump rally, which I think contributed to the mindset that people had, which would have been different had Beethoven or something else been played there. So I'll just conclude by again reiterating this Biden monstrosity is disintegrating before our eyes. And most people in the Democratic Party didn't vote for it. Most Americans didn't. And therefore, we are going to find people very, very open to what we're saying. And we need to organize everyone that we can think of and forget whatever divisions that you think used to exist, because they're no longer there. So that's what I have to say.
Okay, thank you, Diane. All right, Megan, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. I assume I can be heard?
Yes, you may be heard. Go right ahead. And you are the president of the Schiller Institute, I should also make sure I say, so that for the United States, that is.
Well, hopefully everyone's gotten a sense from what Diane went through that we are very lucky to be living at such an incredible moment in history. And hearing me say that, you might wonder if I've been asleep for the past year, but it's not true. I say that because we are at one of those rare moments in human history where it is possible to overturn an entire system. And the system that we have the potential to overturn now is the very evil financial geopolitical system that most nations of the world, including people of the United States, have been suffering under for the past 50 years. And that's possible precisely because that system has collapsed. It's dead. Now, we know that. Lyndon LaRouche forecast it, and we've been telling people that for quite some time now. But our enemies also know that. The people who installed Joe Biden and Kamala Harris into the presidency, for example, know damn well the kind of fraud that they had to pull off in order to do that. And they're also aware that they have nothing left to prop up their dead financial system. And so now what they're desperately moving to try to do is to try to save their power through what they're calling the Great Reset, or the Green Deal, the Green New Deal, to try to preserve their power over governance of nations of the world through their economic policies. Now, to that point, just a little bit of recent history background, the current financial system of Wall Street and the City of London is more bankrupt today than it was in 2008. It is more insolvent, and it's buried under a bubble of debt, which makes the 2008 bubble look puny in comparison. Now, in August of 2019, in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, the world's central bankers held their annual meeting sponsored by the Federal Reserve called the Jackson Hole meeting. And at that time, at that moment, the United States was not part of the Paris Climate Accord, the suicide pact, which we, as of yesterday, have re-entered. And these banks were terrified that they were all about to blow up and go belly up, because they were. And at that Jackson Hole meeting, the then head of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, and a number of executives of a financial management company called BlackRock, which, just as a bit of an aside, BlackRock manages $7.8 trillion, with a T, trillion dollars in so-called assets, which is larger than the GDP of every nation on the planet, with the exception of the United States and China, just to give you a sense of this thing. And many BlackRock executives have now made their way into the current Biden administration. But anyway, Mark Carney and members of BlackRock showed up and said, okay, we're going to have to stabilize the financial system through financial regime change, which means that the central banks of the world are going to assume the traditional role of government in determining monetary policy, that is, determining spending. And they began to implement that, number one, through what had been in motion and in the planning stages as a new series of bailouts from the Fed, which got underway in September of that year, which is helicopter money, right? But also, they were going to get this financial regime change underway by implementing green finance, by announcing that banks of the world would no longer be lending to individuals and companies who were not, quote unquote, green. So what are you talking about? You're talking about coal companies, natural gas companies, car companies, airlines, you name it. So you're talking the actual physical infrastructure of nations of the planet. Now, about a month ago, roughly, even before Trump had left office, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, gleefully announced that the Fed would be joining the Network for the Greening of the Financial System to help implement the Paris Climate Accord, obviously in anticipation of what they were planning to do by installing Biden into office. Now, that is a little bit of recent history. On Monday, 4 days from now, many heads of state will meet in Davos, Switzerland, at the World Economic Forum meeting, along with the biggest bankers and billionaires of the world, at which the plan, not necessarily on the part of the heads of state, but on the part of the banking crowd, is that this, Paris Climate Accord green finance scheme is really going to be set into stone. Now, we know, based on what China's been doing, what India's been doing, what many nations have been doing, that this is not exactly going to fly. But that's exactly what these banking interests fear, that most nations of the world aren't buying it anymore, aren't going along with it. For example, many nations in Africa, in Central America, South America, the Caribbean, have announced that they'd rather work with China's Belt and Road Initiative to develop. They'd rather be able to develop out of the, really horrific, underdeveloped economic conditions that they've been kept in for the past 50 years than go along with more, great financial genius of the West, which is telling them that they can't actually have modern technologies. So the theme of what I want to hit at is power. What actually is power? And many of you might say, well, look, we thought we had power. Trump was the president. What's more powerful than that? And look what happened to him. Look what they did to him, right? They stole everything from him and from us. And now you're telling me that they're going to do it again. But that's a faulty conception. Power, real power, is not the will of the stronger. It's not, what the people with the money can do or want to do. And what I want to suggest to you is to discover a different idea of power. And Diane already hinted at this. What has the power to succeed in the universe we live in? So I'll say that again. Think about what actually has longevity. What has the power to create greater potential than the current state? What has the power to succeed? Now, in that light, the world population today is approximately 7.8 billion people. Now, maybe you already know, but if you don't, I want you to take a guess at when the world population finally reached 1 billion. When did we actually achieve the level of sustaining 1 billion people at the same time on the planet? 1805. So it took all of human history, millions of years, until the year 1805 for us to finally be able to support 1 billion people on the planet. Now, at the time that human beings took our first steps on the moon in 1969, the world population was 3.5 billion people. Now, that's not just an issue of, procreation. You actually have to be able to support and sustain those people. So 1805, 1 billion people. 1969, about a century and a half, a little more later, 3.5 billion. In 2011, right? So that's about 40 years later, we reached 7 billion people on the planet. Now 7.8 today. How many people should we have on the planet? I want you to, answer it for yourself. How many people should be on the planet? How many is too many? What's the limit? Now, LaRouche gave a speech in 1988, just a few weeks before he was locked up in prison by the same people who are trying to destroy Trump and you today. But just a few weeks before that, he gave a speech in which he said that the potential population density of the planet, if we applied the modern technologies we had available to us, was 100 billion people. Now that's power. That's physical power. And you think of why. What is each of those people? It's a source for discovery. It's a source for breakthroughs, for science, for cultural contributions. Now, I want to say a few things here, and I'm going to try to go through it somewhat quickly as I can, but I want to say a few things to take on this myth, which is the big lie that underlies this, green finance, great reset dictatorship. And it's the lie that there are limits to growth. And this is an old lie. It's an old myth, which goes back at least to the Babylonians, but probably farther. And it keeps rearing its ugly head throughout history. Now, why? Why does this keep coming up again and again? Is it because, we've actually ever hit a limit in population growth? Have we ever actually run out of resources on the planet? No, never. So why is it that so many people today, especially policymakers, have been convinced that we're going to run out of resources and soon? Why have so many people adopted the idea and kind of made it part of their identity, their persona, that we as humans consume too much, that we're looting the earth, right? They respond to the idea that all nations of the world should industrialize with horror, right? Saying that no, nations of Africa, they can't have modern technologies like cars and railroads and industries, and because there are too many people and they're going to pollute the planet, right? They're going to use everything up. So those people have to stay poor and use appropriate technologies like windmills and solar panels and treadle pumps to get water out of the ground. In the West, well, we probably should never have developed to this point anyway. So we have to start taking our bicycles everywhere and shutting down all of our nuclear power plants and our coal plants. And we know the outcome of some of that already. For example, Europe almost had a complete blackout last week. So why have so many people adopted that idea? Why do they believe it? Because it's true? No. But because it's been the big lie which has been perpetrated in order to maintain the empire system, which is the colonial system. It's a system that's designed to keep nations and peoples underdeveloped and to call it natural. Now, this was said, for example, by an individual representing the United States in 2013, when this individual spoke to a large gathering of students and young people in South Africa. And this individual told them that they shouldn't even think of having a car for every household and air conditioning for every household because the planet would boil over. And that person happened to be Barack Obama, who at the time was president of the United States, the first African-American, quote-unquote, president of the United States. But it wasn't just said by him. It was said long before him by the Olympian Zeus. And we get the tale of this in Aeschylus's Prometheus Bound, where it said that Zeus got tired of humanity. He decided he hated them and he wanted to wipe them out, wipe them off. They were becoming too populous and he wanted to destroy them and replace them with another species. And Prometheus saved mankind with fire. But it was said much later in more modern times, for example, by Thomas Malthus, who lied, plagiarized Gia Maria Ortiz, but then also lied and said that, population increases geometrically and food increases arithmetically. So, before nature eliminates us, we should take some measures to reduce our own population. Now, was Malthus volunteering? No. He recommended that we enforce, or that England at the time should enforce policies in the poor parts of London, such that, and Ireland, such that the poor are encouraged in terrible habits of sanitation. They're told to build their houses next to sewage so that disease eliminates them, quote unquote, naturally. So that was Malthus. Now, in the 20th century, what became the modern environmentalist movement grew out of that, grew out of the oligarchical empire view of population reduction, of culling the poor. So environmentalism as we know it today, and as it underlies the current Great Reset, was founded at the turn of the 20th century in Britain by the same people, the exact same people who ran the eugenics societies, the race science societies at the time. People like Julian Huxley, Max Nicholson, who was the Queen's Privy Councillor, Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, who was very, very sad when he was forced to resign from the Nazi Party when it became a little bit too hot, and then so forth and so on. So in 1946, just to give you a taste of it, Julian Huxley in 1946 said this: "Thus, even though it is quite true that any radical eugenic policy will be for many years politically and psychologically impossible, it will be important for UNESCO, the organization he was founding, to see that the eugenic problem is examined with the greatest care and that the public mind is informed of the issues at stake so that much of what now is unthinkable may at least become thinkable." Now this Huxley is the same person who in the 1930s helped found not just the British Eugenics Society, but also something called Political and Economic Planning, which was an institution in the British government which promoted policies to reduce the population through fascist economics. And it was these policies which were later picked up by Mussolini. Now, Huxley also in the 1960s, or in 1960, Huxley traveled throughout Africa for several months. And when he returned, he wrote a number of articles, the basic theme of which was that these newly independent African nations cannot be trusted to protect natural spaces and endangered species in their countries. So we must form an international body to take stewardship of these lands. Now, mind you, whom these recently independent African nations were freed from, many of them, right? So this Brit Huxley is traveling around saying that we have to retake these lands because the Africans can't possibly be trusted with them. Now, he followed up with that in 1961 by founding the World Wildlife Fund alongside Prince Philip, the current consort of the Queen of England, and Max Nicholson. So they found the World Wildlife Fund, a bunch of eugenicists and former Nazis, and to show that they weren't just joking about retaking the land of Africa, by the mid-1990s, the World Wildlife Fund had gained control of almost 2 million square kilometers on the continent of Africa, which is about 8% of the entire landmass. So this was cordoned off, turned into wildlife preserves, and kept from being developed by those sovereign nations. You have other examples across other continents in South America, in Central America. The Darien Gap is a good example. The strip of land which connects Central America to South America has never been developed to this day. It's a nature preserve. Now, in 1968, an organization was founded called the Club of Rome. And it was founded by some of the biggest old money landed interests in Europe. And this is an organization that the LaRouche movement has a long history of denouncing and fighting against. In 1972, the Club of Rome put out a book called The Limits to Growth. And this book put out a bunch of incompetent, computer-generated mumbo-jumbo charts, which made assumptions like there would be zero technological progress. It made up arbitrary values to measure things called quote-unquote pollution. And it used these incompetent computer models to conclude that there are limits to human population growth, and we have to take immediate measures to start reducing the development of the human population. Now, in opposition to that, in 1982, Helga LaRouche founded the Club of Life in direct opposition to these policies, and Lyndon LaRouche wrote a book called There Are No Limits to Growth. Now, in 1991, again, just to give you a taste of this, the Club of Rome published a book called The First Global Revolution, where they say, in searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. But in designating them as the enemy, we fall into the trap of mistaking symptoms for causes. All these dangers are caused by human intervention, and it is only through changed attitudes and behavior that they can be overcome. The real enemy is humanity itself. So if that isn't clear, I'm not quite sure what is. But this is the basis of the so-called environmental movement today. Poor people that are toted around like the abused teenager Greta Thunberg, very witting tools like Mark Carney, like Larry Fink of BlackRock, who want to strangle off credit to industries. These guys are the pawns. The policy is Zeus'ian. It's a colonial policy, which is based on a lie about the nature of man. But what's the truth? Well, the truth, as Lyndon LaRouche insisted and confirmed with his own original discoveries in the science of physical economics, is that unlike animals, human beings are the only species for which there is no limit to population growth. And the reason there's no limit is because there's no limit to progress. Human progress, human discovery is potentially infinite, potentially perpetual. And I think that's probably the most beautiful idea I can think of. Human growth, but human development never has to stop. Now, the LaRouche movement, the Schiller Institute, for many, many decades we've dedicated ourselves to forming concrete policies to manifest and fulfill that potential. That has been LaRouche's mission, Helga LaRouche's mission, and our mission. And it's a mission I would invite all of you to join us in. We have many, many resources for this. Lyndon LaRouche wrote many papers on economics, some of which we've published in the first volume of his collected works by the LaRouche Legacy Foundation. We've published reports called The New Silk Road Becomes the World Land Bridge, which outlines all of the development policy proposals either currently underway with China's Belt and Road or proposed and on the books. So just to echo what Diane said and conclude here, I think the situation now is more open, more ripe for organizing than ever before. I think our enemies are more exposed and more desperate than ever before. And I think victory really is, in a sense, just around the corner, although it's obviously going to take a fight. And therefore, what we need is people with real ideas that have power, real power, to create this next era of civilization. So I'll end there.
Okay, thanks a lot. I'm going to open up the queue now, and people can...
Q&A session has started. To ask your question, please press *6.
Queue for questions, comments, clarification. Okay, so we just opened it up. Let me say a couple of things just about the sorts of things we're involved with. People saw what was presented on Monday, which was done as a Schiller Institute conference. You know that we have this Citizens Commission for Truth in Elections. It's sort of important because of what that organization intends to do, and we will be doing something tomorrow night, actually, with Diane, Sare, which will largely investigate this aspect of our work. And that'll feature a few people that were with us actually on Monday who will be joining us for that discussion. Now, the purpose of that discussion is going to go way beyond talking about, quote, vote fraud. But the idea is, okay, what are we going to do about this? We know that this goes on, so what exactly do we do? There are various other organizations and associations that are saying things about that, that may or may not find themselves involved with us also. So that's tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. So that's the first thing. The second is that on Saturday, of course, we'll be having our regular Manhattan Town meeting. That will, this week, have Harley Schlanger, Diane, and Jason Ross. Those will be the people that will be there. That'll be at 2 o'clock on Saturday. And then beyond that, we want to also make sure that people are aware of what we're doing with our EIR and alert services. We'll probably say more about that later. People are starting to get in the queue, so we'll want to get to questions. But and there's a couple of other matters I just want to ask for a response, actually, from both or either of Megan and Diane to this. This is something that we've been talking about a little bit, which should be, I think, referenced. This was from a talk that was given in 2017 by a woman named Zeynep Tufekci, and she's referred to as a techno-sociologist. Here's what she had to say. What we need to fear most is not what artificial intelligence will do to us, on its own, but how the people in power will use artificial intelligence to control us and to manipulate us in novel and sometimes hidden, subtle, and unexpected ways. So then she reports the following. Experiments show that what algorithms pick to show you can affect your emotions. But that's not all. They can also affect political behavior. So in 2010, this is now 11 years ago, in the midterm election, Facebook did an experiment on 61 million people in the United States that was disclosed after the fact. In other words, they did it and nobody knew they were doing it. Some people were shown there were two different ballot forms, or two, not ballot forms, but sort of two different announcements. One said, today is election day. Okay, and that one didn't have any pictures. And then some people were shown the one with a tiny tweet with little thumbnails of your friends who clicked on I voted. This simple tweet. So the pictures were the only change, and that post, shown just once, turned out an additional 340,000 voters in that election, according to the research as confirmed by the voter rolls. A fluke? No, because in 2012 they repeated the same experiment. And that time, that message, shown just once, turned out an additional 270,000 voters. For reference, the 2016 U.S. presidential election was decided by about 100,000 votes. Now, Facebook can also very easily infer what your politics are, even if you've never disclosed them on the site. These algorithms can do that quite easily. What if a platform with that kind of power decides to turn out supporters of one candidate over the other? How will we even know about it? Now, of course, as we know, Facebook and Twitter and others took certain actions against Donald Trump, and for that matter, against a lot of other people. And so I just wanted to, first of all, just let that be known, and maybe there'll be a comment that Diane or others will give, or that Megan will give as we go on. We'll go to the lines now because there's some people on, so I want to make sure we get that. But just keep that in mind. You guys may have a response to what I just read. Okay, are you able to hear it? Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you. Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
This is Kevin from...
Your first name? Yeah, okay, fine.
Yeah, Kevin, St. Paul, Minnesota. Diane, you brought up this vaccine-resistant strains. It reminded me of something that happened to me during work last week. I came across a gentleman at a nursing home. He said he, was tired. I asked him why. He said, well, my roommate has a COVID in his lungs, so he's been up at nights coughing. And I very concerned there. I first asked, why are you in the same room with him? And he says, well, I have the vaccine. So I got the vaccine. So I was just wondering if that's our policy. Is that okay?
I think you'd have to ask a doctor. I mean, I think I don't know. I think the vaccine doesn't take effect right away. That's why most of them, depending on what type of vaccine it is, require 2 doses a few weeks apart. You don't have your full immunity. I know one of the things that had been proposed by insane people was to eliminate the second dose, which would mean your immunity was less secure, which would mean that you would possibly be helping to develop a strain of virus that could overcome the vaccine. So I don't think we should just willy-nilly presume that we've been vaccinated, we're safe, and therefore let's expose ourselves to intense doses of the disease. It does not make sense to me.
Let me just ask a question. Megan, you have anything to say about that? Because I can say something quickly about it.
No, nothing different.
Yeah, let me just say something. We don't have policies about what people are going to do with their health. This is something that unfortunately became a mad, insane characteristic of the electoral discussion. whether you wear a mask or you don't wear a mask is not a political question. You can say that you disagree with something about the nature of the disease, I suppose, but to make that political is outrageously insane. Now, I'm going to say this because I think it's important just to have as a perspective. There's from 1973-74, as part of the core of our economic outlook, it's something that distinguished LaRouche from everyone else from that time. It was our firm assertion, and it was done, by the way, against the environmentalists, who were always, talking about the problem of population, and they were talking about nuclear power as a problem and so on. And we said, if you are at all concerned about the issue of the environment, then you would be concerned about stopping the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, because their economic policies have the effect of devolving the economies of human beings who have been on the planet for a long time. Now, here's the problem. People believe in something which is not true. They believe that you can just, quote, reverse progress. And so, you've had people on the planet, and what you do is just cut back their consumption, and somehow that will help the planet because you cut it back. But here's the problem. What actually happens is you move forward into a new type of devolution. That is to say that mankind is a part of the biosphere and has affected and has developed and has changed and transformed it, no matter what people would like to believe about that. If you begin to create circumstances, which is what was done, that would destroy and depopulate mankind, what you were actually doing was altering the biosphere, not just changing something in an economy. And what would happen is that new forms of disease would appear as pools of disease, not one virus, not some particular strain of something, but you would have created a process which would take on a dynamic. Now, what then happened was 10 years later, the acquired immune deficiency syndrome, as it was called, which was a pool of retroviruses, well, that didn't appear. It actually had been in Africa, particularly in Congo, from sometime in at least the 1950s. But what happened was, for various reasons, not important to go through here, it then became very prevalent, of course, in the United States, Europe, other places. And so then it was thought, we thought, certainly, that if people took emergency measures and began to study optical biophysics and began to studying processes in the biosphere, something would happen. Instead, what happened? What happened is that people refused then to organize an international new health platform. That's 35 years ago. Now what happens? This whole business begins to happen. And the first thing people say is, it's got to be a biological weapon. Maybe it's a biological weapon, but here's the problem. The degraded circumstances of the economy of the United States are what is killing people. Now, people say, oh, no, it's not the coronavirus, it's something else. And if it is coronavirus, it came from China and all these other things. But the truth of the matter is that you have had an insane set of economic policies that have dominated the world since particularly 1971. And they had effects. And now what has happened is we're in a circumstance, just to be clear, where people think that they have the luxury of playing around with a lethal disease that they believe that you can somehow study for 15 minutes on the internet and understand the nature of it. So we're in a circumstance, just to say, where a sharp slap in the face to most people in the United States about what the hell they're dealing with is really necessary. We are dealing with a life-threatening circumstance, not of COVID. That's not the problem. It's the problem of the combination of circumstances that have been created over a period of 60 years. And then an environmental policy, so-called, a Green New Deal policy, a global reset policy, that no matter what you think about COVID, is going to create a circumstance, or has already perhaps, which will create a kind of circumstance that might be, in fact, impossible to reverse. So pandemic disease, that's what it does. the idea of policy, here's our policy. Our policy is put together an army of thinkers, get people actually working on the frontiers of research, get people actually thinking about how to solve these problems, not one by one, not take COVID-19 and solve that, and then maybe COVID-23 we can solve. That's completely incompetent. But instead, combine our forces in the world, recognize how little we know, and then forge ahead. And forge ahead instead of trying to think that, oh, we've got the cure for, right? No, we've now got the cure for stupidity. We recognize we're going to face this and face it as a nation, as a world. And we're going to have people stop trying to act like, they can, put together a syrup in the bathroom and cure cancer. By the way, that's not an exaggeration. I won't go through why I said that, but I know some people that were doing that 11 years ago, okay, when I went, visited them. So, this kind of stuff has just got to stop. And we need to recognize that we don't know a lot. Some things we really got to work on. And, we can't have policies or claim, but we have a policy as an organization about this or that. Okay, I'm going to go on to the next person. Yes, hello?
Hello, hi, can I be heard?
Yes.
Okay, hi there. Yes, this is Jose Vega here in the Bronx. And with the outgoing administration goes Jim Bridenstine, too, from NASA. And I don't want to ask what's going to happen to Artemis now. I can only assume the worst. So I want to ask, what am I supposed to do right now to make sure that we don't lose Artemis? Because I don't think anything officially has been done to cancel it. But I just don't know what's going to happen, and I want to make sure that something does happen. But what can be done with somebody who doesn't believe, and a whole government that doesn't believe we should have these advancements and think that these things would just kill the Earth? So what should be done?
Well, I'll say a few things, and you're welcome to add. One thing, maybe to start from like the lower, more specific level, is that there is a certain natural support for the space program in the Congress, which has somehow survived all of these insane administrations which have tried to totally kill it throughout the years. So I think I think we might expect a certain move from the Congress to try to protect the funding for Artemis, maybe. But I think the real answer to your question is we have to win the new paradigm. I think we really are at a moment where we're not going to save this good thing or that good thing, or, I think it was said by either Diane or Dennis earlier, you're not going to stop just COVID, or something. You're not going to solve this one problem over there. I think we really do have to win the whole fight, and you imagine, for example, if the United States were to be working with China, the other most developed nation on the planet, most powerful nation on the planet, to solve the real problems of mankind. And, one of the ironies is that there's talk in some of the people around the Biden administration of ending the Wolf Amendment. Now, I don't know, for people who don't know, the Wolf Amendment was put in by a terrible person who used to be my congressman from Virginia, who bans our space agency, NASA, from working directly with the space agency of China. But anyway, I think we really do have to win the whole fight, win the whole new paradigm. So anyway, that's a level on which I think we have to think of it. And I think you can, in the organizing process, I think you can use things like the space program. And just to say, Artemis is fine as far as it goes, but it's nothing new. It's actually not bringing anything new to the table. If we really want a space program, we're going to have a program where we're working right now on nuclear propulsion, where we're commissioning designs for fusion power plants to be able to utilize the helium-3 on the moon for our permanent stations that we're going to set up there, in 5, 6, 7 years or something like that. Really, really forward thinking. So anyway, that's what I'd say.
Okay. Let me see here. Okay, now we have a couple people in here, and I'm saying anonymous. So when you get on, and let me say to these people, we're supposed to be able to tell, well, at least have a sense of what the number is. So get on. When we get on, please state who you are and where you're calling from. Okay, can you hear us?
Hi, this is Dawn from Long Island, New York.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I'm pretty new to the group, but I just have a question. I mean, it's obvious. I think most of the world has seen the media and the corporations and Hollywood and social media and everybody pile on President Trump, right? And I kind of sit on the sidelines, and I really don't understand why, what's really behind all that. And I know that you've talked about the Great Reset and the Green New Deal, but it's kind of hard to believe that they're all aware of the Great Reset, and that's why they've all done that to them. I mean, is it like corporations? I mean, I know that they've tried to do things with visa programs, bring in cheap foreign labor, all the H-1Bs, and I know that Trump has tried to stop that and tried to stop the immigration. And is that part of it too, or do you feel that it's all that they're aware of the Green New Deal and they want to march, to that order? So they're all kind of piled on. Another thing you mentioned, Facebook and their algorithms. And I was wondering, I take a step back and I look at Facebook and, all the psychologists they must have around because they're billionaires. Do you think Facebook on some level is brainwashing people, or the media? Because the mainstream media maybe is 5, 6 stations, and they're all controlled by, I don't know, I heard George Soros or whatever. Do you think, and the people on the left that I talk to, they all kind of say the same exact thing. So do you think that in a way they're brainwashing people? Because I for the life of me can't understand why people would be against Trump and all that he's done for this country in the last 4 years. It's amazing. And to see the majority of people just taking such a different stance, and they say they love Biden, but when I ask them, what has Biden done in 47 years in Congress, they all look at me with, like a deer in headlights, and they'll say, I'll get back to you. Right? So it's just hard to believe that all of this, I'm just trying to, I guess, understand the root of what you feel is truly going on, the current, why so many people in Hollywood and social media and the media and Congress and even the GOP has piled on Trump. Thanks.
Well, I think that's an excellent question. Diane, you want to take it?
I'd love to. I think what you're saying, look, it's both. It's everything. It is, on the one hand, I think there's 2 levels to the evil. There's little greedy, fat, scumbag jerks who are going to make money and think they're getting paid, and they do it for that reason and no other. Then you have people like Bertrand Russell, who, I don't know if you know the name, he was really inappropriately heralded as a great peace activist, the turn of the 18 to 1900s, who actually wrote a whole book called, I think, The Implications for Science and Society. Is that it, Dennis? I'm trying to think of the name of the book.
The Impact of Science on Society.
Impact of Science on Society, yeah, where he talks about the behavior, psychology. He says mass psychology, that this will make leaps and bounds when we can figure out exactly how much it costs per pupil to make students believe that snow is black. Now, what is that? And that is real evil, and the stench of it should sort of burn in your nose. What is it? The idea is to say human beings are not in the image and likeness of God. They don't have an innate capacity for reason to know right and wrong, that human beings are merely animals, and we're going to prove it to you by programming them and manipulating them. And in a sense, Facebook with these algorithms is exactly that. It's that kind of evil. And it is not just, because I know I've said myself, well, I'm not doing anything secret. I don't want people looking at me naked or something, so I cover the cameras and stuff. But I say, well, I'm not doing anything secret. Do I really care? It's not about do they know what you're doing. It's that they get a profile of you so that they can manipulate you and get you to change your behavior as though you're a robot or an animal. Right? And that is the real evil of it. And it's very deliberate and willful. And that's why I made the point about classical music as one, because you want to engage people in things that employ their full concentration, physical and mental. I have to say, and I think many people, if you reflect on it, just from having the stupid, smartphone, you notice that your ability to concentrate is less, right? You're always, and they torture you with notifications if you get a text. Or I saw how they brainwashed the anti-Trump people. I have one of my husband's relatives that we were out to dinner with her, and every 5 seconds she's getting an alert on her phone. Ding! Trump doesn't care about the extinction of the black-bellied hippopotamus something or other. Ding! And it's another alert. Trump is doing blah, blah, blah. Right. So this person is getting bombarded with these absurd, alerts. And the other thing it does is it is literally the case that you and your friends, if they only rely on social media for news and not television, which is another horrible thing, but it's less pervasive because everybody sees the same thing on NBC. But if it's on Facebook or Twitter, whatever, they're only feeding you what you're interested in. So it is literally the case. I was at Wall Street the other day. I met a bunch of people who hated Biden, but they were there because they think Biden isn't going to do enough to shut down fossil fuels. So one of them came up to me and said, are you with, because I was filming a statement for my Senate campaign. So I had been reading this, script that I wrote about the fact that Trump had actually won the election and so on. And he says, are you with QAnon? I said, no. Well, what do you mean Trump? I said, there's mountains of evidence. There's massive vote fraud. Well, of course, he had never heard any such thing. And it's true because whatever he's looking at is profiled to him. Right. So it is, right? It is absolutely that.
I think it's orchestrated. I really do.
It is.
I think that they're building a profile of this person like, Trump or whatever. Or this person is a Biden president.
But I also wanted to, as you're saying, I also wanted to say, look, we have, with LaRouche, have enormous authority because this all happened to us 30 years ago. That is, the FBI and U.S. Marshals, 400 of them, raided LaRouche's. They surrounded LaRouche's home with the intent to assassinate him. LaRouche got a telegram to Reagan, and Reagan called the thing off. Yeah, because LaRouche was working with Reagan. LaRouche was Reagan's back channel to the Soviet Union. But Bush and company had ordered it while Reagan was en route to Iceland. But what else did they do? They shut down our newspaper. They stole all our files. They literally, in the primitive age of the 1980s, we had subscribers to written publications. The government shut down all of our publications, declared them involuntarily bankrupt, and then wrote tens of thousands of articles saying Lyndon LaRouche is a right-wing extremist, a left-wing extremist, a homophobe, a racist, a neo-Nazi, a communist, this, that, the other thing. So that even to this day, if you're talking to people over 60, you say the name LaRouche, and people have, it's like a Pavlovian reaction. Oh, LaRouche. There was something about him, and happily it's now shattering because so many people supported Trump. And I would just say the problem they have is that people actually are not robots and we are not animals. We are human. So that their ability to control people as much as they need to or intend to is not going to work. And that's what happened with the election, as Megan was saying. They had to pour so much into this thing to steal it from Trump, that they're in a very tenuous situation.
They are, because it's so obvious that they did. You know, it's horrible. I think this is the worst thing, I really do, that our country has ever seen. I mean, it's so obvious that they still, you know, where they go from here, I don't know, but it's so obvious, you know.
Well, you might want to get on tomorrow night, you know, by the way, and because we're going to be discussing exactly that. Diane will be on with a few other people, a guy named Steve Freeman, somebody named Lynn Landis, and some other people. So that specific area of the elections is what we're going to be talking about tomorrow night. So you're certainly welcome to join us for that.
Great.
Diane, you need to say anything about how people get to on that?
It'll be, unless I get booted, it'll be live on my Facebook page, Diane Sare, or I think it's Sare for Senate. Anyway, if you look up Diane Sare on S-A-R-E on Facebook, and it's also on YouTube, on my YouTube channel, Sare for Senate. And you can find it on my website, sareforsenate.com, and Sare is S-A-R-E. It's tomorrow night at 8 p.m.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Are you able to hear us?
Yes. How do you do? This is Jay from upstate New York. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. In concerns with the free and fair elections and, you know, the fraud that's going on, I am hoping that Kirk Wiebe and Bill Binney can gain audience with Josh Hawley. He is a Missouri senator. I don't know if you've heard him, but he's quite phenomenal. My question is, and it's a bit lengthy here, who did Trump pardon other than the 4 BlackRock murderers who opened fire on Iraqi civilians and killed 17 of them? And you know, Trump is invested in BlackRock. I'll close with a simple statement here, and I'm looking into the future when I say this. Through his 3 or 4 years of office, Trump has always left me feeling absolutely fab-dubious. So please answer the BlackRock question. Thank you.
Okay, Diane, go ahead.
Well, aside from those people, he pardoned Steve Bannon, which is terrible, and about 145 or so other people, most of whom I never heard of, the mayor of Detroit and others. And I just suspect, look, there's all kinds of deals going on because they've got Trump's neck in a noose. He's trying to run for president in 2024. Their intention is, it's not really about him, and that's why we have to create other leaders. We need more leaders. Because it's not Trump per se, it's a direction of the American population, which they saw reflected in Trump.
Very good.
Right?
I agree with that. Yes, that's good.
Yeah. So what they want to do is they want to destroy and demoralize the American people who have that revolutionary spark. And that's why I could add something. Talking. What? Go ahead.
You may have heard he was either a news reporter or a political person during the inauguration. Their statement plainly stated was, you are either a Democrat or you are a rebel, which really reduces it to a one-party system. So it's kind of stupid. But that's what I heard.
Yep.
Well, that's an irony, of course, because the Democratic Party was a party of slavery and treason. So that's sort of a funny idea. By the way, otherwise, since I'll just reference this. If you happen to have Netflix or some equivalent platform like that, you might want to take a look at a movie called not Touch of Evil, The Lady from Shanghai by Orson Welles. And if you take a look at that movie, you will get an insight into a problem that Donald Trump was caused to have. And that problem was called Roy Cohn. You have to see the movie, and the character that plays the lawyer is actually a very close image of Roy Cohn. And Cohn is really that's the center of the paradox of the, shall we say, mercurial quality of Donald Trump's politics. Not just because you met Roy Cohn didn't mean you have to be irredeemable, as Roger Stone has shown. But that's just something for anybody that cares to research it. Just do that, and you'll get a good image of the problem. Okay, we're going to go on to the next person here. Yeah, hello, can you hear us? Hello?
Hello. Hi, thanks for taking my question. My name is Shelley, and I'm from New York.
Hi.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, awesome. So my question includes some statements as well, and certainly I would like to hear opinions on COVID, the 2020 situation that we are experiencing still in a new year, a pandemic that was supposed to last till the summer of last year. There's a lot of information, things that people have not considered, or we so easily forget, that the people in power, they tell us what to do. You know, wear a mask, not to wear a mask, wear a mask. And then now, initially when it started, they needed all these millions of ventilators because 2 million people will die by the summer in the United States. The ventilators is known to doctors, healthcare practitioners, to be a last resort, and many people who end up on ventilators do not survive it, especially those that have comorbidities. This is even pre-COVID. So I feel like with the vaccines, we are being foolhardy to think that they could possibly develop a vaccine, even though I know that Trump did I'm glad he was able to do a lot of the things that he did. President Trump, love him. But he was catering, I believe, to the demands of the left. So you want ventilators? He got them ventilators in like masses produced practically overnight. Masks, PPE, everything. So everybody has more than enough. Where there was a shortage for a short period of time, he managed to get it here. However, I don't believe that the vaccine will be helpful, or should we trust that it will help save lives? For one, Bill Gates and people like him have been trying to figure out ways to depopulate the earth for a long time. And he became very obsessed with viruses, including in the computer software. And if he himself wants to depopulate the earth, or maybe not have it populate any further, why would we trust that something that he will create is going to save lives? As it relates to Africa not getting vaccines, I think I read or I saw a video where the president or the whatever title they have, prime minister, refused to have the vaccines. And that's probably why it's not in a lot of the countries in Africa. Me personally, I do not want an experiment on my body. And I will say one more point about this as it relates to our health. Years ago, 50 plus years ago, farmers found ways to keep their crops alive, not have pests eat away at the crop. They introduced Roundup. They introduced fertilizers. Sorry, trying to say a lot in a short period of time, and it helped produce beautiful fruits and vegetables. But we now know, many years later, that it was not good for us, and it's likely a big cause of, the proliferation of cancer and so many other things. So I think people really need to seriously consider how effective this vaccine will be for us and whether or not it's needed. What do you think?
Okay. Oh, good. Oh, that's good. Megan, Diane, who's going to take it?
Megan, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. And then, yeah, Diane, I'd definitely invite you to add some things to it. But
Okay.
I think, our health system has been in the process of being dismantled for many, many decades. Dennis mentioned, I think it was in his intro, that Lyndon LaRouche forecast the outbreak of pandemic disease, not as a conspiracy theory or something like that, but as an economic consequence of the policies that were being imposed in the post-1971 world. And he was able to forecast that on the basis of knowing what the physical requirements are to maintain the health of a population. And elements of that physical requirement are food, adequate sanitation, adequate and open access to medical care when needed, general happiness, levels of education, and so forth. And when that's attacked and looted and taken down, as it has been intentionally by the post-19 or via the post-1971 financial order, you get a situation where the biosphere, and our bodies are part of the biosphere in a certain sense, isn't actually able to maintain the kind of level of health necessary to resist the outbreak of new diseases and the rapid spreading of new diseases such that they become pandemic. It really is an economic question, and I think one of the problems that we're dealing with, especially in the United States, is that especially since the health system under Nixon was turned over and turned into a for-profit system, people have just been thrown in the ditch, so to speak, in terms of health, and people are kind of, people can't afford, people's health care premiums, you might be suffering this, I don't know, but, are $600-700 a month that they're paying for health insurance, which covers nothing. So I think people are sort of in a condition where they're trying to scrounge out a state of health within a system that's really dead set against it. So I think, I think we really would think differently about this if we did have a health system which was organized as part of a national economic policy which had the intention to develop and support and promote the well-being of the population, as we have had at times in our history. You go back to what this country would have looked like if Franklin Roosevelt hadn't died at the end of World War II and had been able to remain president and oversee the post-war United States and play the role that he had been playing in the post-war world, where he intended to end the colonial system. So anyways, I actually think you have to approach these questions from that kind of top-down total economic view rather than as isolated, as an isolated topic or issue.
Diane, are you adding something?
Well, just, these things here's the problem. There's no moment where you don't have to actually think, because Bill Gates is a pretty scummy person who thinks the world is overpopulated. That's true. On the other hand, there is a virus. I don't know. There's people in Wuhan now trying to figure out how it started. I don't know how it started. I'm not going to say that I do. But there is a science behind vaccines and they're being effective, and we saw that with smallpox, measles, other things. So that I intend to get vaccinated, and I hope we can put an end to this virus and not have it boomeranging around the planet every year or so. On the other hand, that's not to say that there haven't been absolutely evil things done by people in the name of public health, like the syphilis experiments at Tuskegee, or whether they were experimenting on people in Africa with vaccines. I'm afraid that is the case, because you have people who are absolutely committed to reducing the population, and we know that Kissinger actually wrote a document in 1975 where NSSM 200, where he said we should use food as a weapon, we should do secret sterilizations of people, whatever it takes to make sure countries don't grow in population. So that's the challenge. We cannot be rigid and just make blanket statements. We have to think our way through this. I will also say that China, I think, is very interesting, and one of the devastating consequences of us having this hostile relationship with China is we're not talking to them. They seem to have really kept the death rate very, very low, even now where they're having a few scattered little outbreaks of COVID. Very few people are dying. And I heard an interview with a 101 or 104-year-old Chinese man, I forget how old he was, who had just come out of the hospital in somewhere in China, and he had survived COVID. And he said, well, they're combining ancient Chinese medicine with Western medicine. So clearly you have people who are using their minds, who are saying, look, there's certain things to ancient Chinese medicine which takes a more holistic approach that seem to be effective. And there are certain things we've learned in recent and modern science which are also effective. So instead of being rigid purists about one or the other, we're going to think about how we're going to tackle this. And I guess that's the challenge. So it's not a straight answer. The fortunate or unfortunate thing is we can never give up thinking.
I would also add this, that it's good to question these things. You want to know that for 50 years, literally 50 years, the issue of health care in the New York State area has been at the very center of what people recognize was happening to the city. I'm just thinking the city because that's not Long Island, but it's relevant to this whole thing. For a half century, the New York City health system, I'm talking about the hospital system, the number of doctors, the number of nurses available, this thing has been under siege ever since they began to have the profit motive go into this. If you look at the way in which, as was already said, as you said, the confusion around what the hell this all was at the beginning and what people should do is exactly why people began to distrust. And as you said, and that's true, people were essentially led to believe that by the summer of last year this was going to be over, as opposed to the notion that you were actually dealing with an epidemic that was stretching to a pandemic. And it was rejected as a and what happened was, it was true that there were political manipulations around a disease. That was the problem. And so I would just, and by the way, there's several people calling it for the first time tonight. It was really good. I'm glad we heard from you. Please continue to ask questions and what you said. We heard you. It's important to know one other thing. I'd just like to say to everybody, because a lot of people are still on, and it's really good. Actually, more people are getting on. And what's happening here is that we're trying to get a dialogue going where the notion is create an army of thinkers. There's a lot that needs to be done in the very short term. Take the Chuck Schumer issue. There is a way to defeat Chuck Schumer, and that would be important to do, especially given what he did to Trump. He was one of the first guys out of the box that threatened Trump on the intelligence question. And the business around COVID became a backdrop and then a metaphor, a political metaphor. And in one sense, that was really bad because really it had to be dealt with as, a real threat to humanity. And the issue is, okay, now what are we going to do? As opposed to say, oh, it's not a threat, or even saying you knew what it was, because that's the biggest problem. I'm not talking about you. I'm saying as a whole, the country has to get used to the idea of thinking, not being afraid of it, not being afraid of disputing, not being afraid of being contradicted, and then considering what someone else is saying, so that we can actually arrive at some kind of conception of policy. But I wanted to thank you for calling in.
Thank you again, all of you, for answering and giving valuable input. input.
Yeah, Shelley. Try to make it onto Diane's platform tomorrow night, by the way. That might be,
All right.
be good.
Got it.
Yeah. Great. Bye-bye. Okay, are you able to hear us? Hello?
Hello. May I be heard?
Yes.
Okay, this is Patricia in Virginia, and I'm glad you brought up the point of we have to be thinking all the time, because it doesn't actually sound like this is necessarily the case, particularly on these issues with the LaRouche group. I don't think you've actually got anybody who can focus on it. Yes, Diane said we've had prior vaccines. They've been very good and useful, and this may be the case. But this is a different kind of a vaccine. It has different kinds of elements in it. And first of all, one needs to really research what's in this vaccine or this set of vaccines, not what what helped people 50 years ago. The second thing is that you have to look carefully at the numbers, and you have to look at how cases are being reported. And it's just a joke that we know there's money being given if COVID goes down as a diagnosis as opposed to something else. So really, the bulk of people who are listed as COVID deaths are not necessarily COVID-related at all. It could be almost anything. So the numbers are greatly inflated. The third thing is the CDC just came out at the beginning of the year with their mortality numbers broken down by types for this year compared to the years going backwards. And if you adjust for the population if you adjust for the population, you see that there is no greater rate of death this year than there has been in other years. You'll also notice that this year this past year don't seem to have been any flu deaths, where as in prior years we've always had an incidence of flu, which by the same token the numbers have been pushed up. And also, they are not counting in, they're not looking at the part where you're seeing the number of suicides, homicides, excess drug overdose deaths and things which could be attributed to the lockdown that we've had for the last year. And there are a few more points that are, in that same line related to that. So unless you've actually looked at all these things, the claims that they're making about the numbers and the pandemic nature of it and everything else does not hold up, nor does the fact of what they're asking people to do, the social distancing and the masks and whatever, are not going to be effective at changing anything. And if you look
I'd like to say a few things before you go farther.
Manufacturers have said and have in their package inserts, they're saying less and less people should be taking it, not people under 16, not people who are pregnant, not people who have had allergic reactions to anything else in the past. That we now find out that these have polyethylene glycol in them, which has been in earlier shots, which have made people have reactions. So unless you've done
let me just cut in right now, because first of all, it's not true. There was a massive increase in deaths. In New York City, on an average day, they would find 25 bodies in homes, and it increased sixfold to 150. So you may want to say, oh, well, it wasn't COVID. Well, what was it? Because there was a massive increase in deaths. We saw the trucks and the ambulances. Maybe you didn't see that in Virginia, but I can tell you in New York, it was happening where they had to create mass graves because the morgues were overwhelmed. And I know people who worked at the morgues. I know a forensic pathologist who works for the NYPD, and it was the case. There was a spectacular increase in the number of deaths that simply happened. And Dennis mentioned the point of politicizing this. I'll also say you just have to use common sense. This disease is airborne. They have charts of restaurants and parties of who got infected and who didn't. And therefore, knowing that, it makes total sense that wearing a mask, particularly an N95 mask, would mitigate the spread of the disease. I have a close family member who is a medical doctor who wears an N95 mask all the time. She works in one state. She has another practice in North Carolina where they have virtually no restrictions. They don't test anyone for COVID. You don't have to wear a mask in the grocery store. And in the nursing homes, they put COVID patients in the same room with others. They don't even test people. Well, it turned out in her practice that a person was an asymptomatic carrier, and 50% of the people in her office got sick. 2 had to be hospitalized. She didn't get sick. She wears an N95 mask all the time. So there is, as I said, one has to think about this in many directions. I have a theory, a hypothesis, that one of the reasons we got so much contradicting information and this QAnon stuff about COVID and how it's all a fraud was actually designed to cause the president to have conflicting messages so that you would have an increased number of people infected, which could then be blamed on him. But please don't say that we haven't had this number of deaths and so on, because it's just absolutely not the case.
There's another element.
Number of deaths.
There's another element. Wait. Hey, you talked a lot, okay? So you said we don't think. So let me pose something to you as a thinking experiment. Simple thing to think about. What does it matter what the people actually died of when you have that number of people that died? Here is what is going on in the country. Go to any major city.
Number of
Go to
people,
any
rate
major
of death.
city. It's not the same rate for a simple reason.
The years before
It's simple, yes. But what about in Italy? What about in France? What about in Germany? Now, what you'll probably say, maybe you won't say it, is, well, I'm not concerned with that. I'm just concerned with the United States. And this
I don't have numbers. I cannot speak to other countries.
We do. We can give you numbers because we have people that live in Sweden. We have people that live in Italy. We have people that live in France. We have people that live in Germany. We have people that live in Mexico, particularly in Mexico City. We have people who live in Peru. They're all members of our organization. We're talking about people from our organization that have had to bury relatives. So, see, you can say what you're saying and talk about numbers, but numbers are evil. Let me explain to you what I mean by that. We make a big point about this all of the time. It's like the thing we said about the algorithm and the fact that they can shift the algorithms to wipe out a guy like Chris Hedges, who we don't particularly like, Pulitzer Prize-winning author and all that kind of stuff, reporter, and they just change the algorithm on him, and all of a sudden you can't find him. Just done with numbers. There's a lot of things you can do with numbers. And we don't have a problem. I don't have a problem with anything that you were saying about trying to dispute this or that. But to say that we don't think about it and we don't have anybody that, is capable of doing this, we got a guy named Kildare Clark. The guy ran the Kings County Medical Office of Brooklyn, one of the largest emergency rooms in the country. He exposed for 20 years what was going on in that location. He's a medical doctor. He has talked about the problem with the vaccine, et cetera, et cetera. You know what he said about this? He said everybody ought to take it, and here's why. It may have problems, but if you don't take it, given what I've seen with this disease, you can die of this, and that's 100%. Now, the point is you may not get it, he said. That's true. But if you do, your chances of not surviving are very, very high. Now, the reason for saying this is the notion that anybody sitting anywhere, compiling any set of figures, can come to any conclusion that is remotely insane is exactly what's wrong with the entire discussion and the entire medical community. The entire medical community that's pushing that kind of crap. We're dealing with something new. It may not be COVID. It may be called something different. The new thing you are dealing with, like it or not, is the effect of the collapse of the financial system and the physical effect it's had on the world. Now, people don't want to deal with that. We've been talking
I agree with you absolutely. That is the overriding issue. I'm just talking about whether people as individuals choose to take this vaccine. And I'm saying that if you look at what the package inserts say for the various products, they claim that it's not going to keep you from getting the vaccine, and it's not going to do anything for you if you have a massive attack of this stuff. It's most effective, they say, for mild cases. And if you have a mild case,
what I'm saying to you is
probably
the broader,
the
broader issue is what we have to deal with. That's what we do. You know, when it comes to the individual choices that people are going to make, that's exactly the point we made at the beginning. The very first person that called in, that's why we said it. We're not going to make medical policy. We don't believe in that. We don't believe we have the competence to do that in that way. What we can do is this. We can identify the arc of what is going on in the social policy and in the financial policy and in the economic policy. Now, in order for us to be able to do that kind of thing that you're talking about, or anybody to do that, and here's the issue to me, for anybody to do that, you would need a kind of collaboration going on among not just doctors, among not just people who are medical researchers. You got to have a collaboration going on with biophysicists. You got to be doing a thing where you're turning out all kinds of people, not merely in the medical field, but in several fields simultaneously, to launch an actual investigation on the conditions that are developing or are causing these diseases to develop, because there are many of them. There's all sorts. There's SARS, there's MERS, there's various kinds of avian flu, which is more or less virulent. There's all kinds of notions of species jump. This stuff is all happening. There's the problem of antibiotic-resistant disease. A lot of stuff happening out there. And this is why we talk about having a new platform, new health platform, so that people are actually engaged in a collaboration, which would be extremely exciting and important scientifically to do. No small-minded solutions to problems which are way bigger than our puny capabilities of understanding them allow us, right, to confront. It's just the nature of our situation.
I agree with you absolutely on everything you've said, on everything that the LaRouche people have been promoting for a long time. I am just disputing this particular vaccine with the three companies that are making it, and that one, nothing else.
Okay, all right, great, no problem. We're just going to move on because it's pretty late.
Thank you. I appreciate you hearing me out.
Sure, absolutely.
And I hope Diane rethinks her position for herself.
Well, I got vaccinated yesterday, so but so long. All right, can you hear us?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll make it brief. Look, I this is Brian from Houston. Look, I almost lost my mom to this virus. But I did lose my stepfather after on the 19th this week. So I mean there's a lot, but I think that the and they both live in Los Angeles, California. My brother, Trump supporter, and he was doing the whole COVID is fake. So you can imagine what he's going through. But the thing is that my mom put it best, I suppose, when she said that she felt like she was in a war zone. So I just
Yeah, no, we hear you, and we of course we sympathize with the loss, but also you've just helped make things very clear, so that people can just cut this out. This is not a question which we can afford to have ideological views of. This is a circumstance in which we're confronting something we don't fully understand. And it will take all of us in collaboration, working, and not making enemies of anybody anywhere in the world that may be able to help. Hell, if somebody in China is doing something, or Vietnam, or Cuba, or wherever it is, and it's working, we all need that knowledge. And if that means that we're dropping the ideology at the door in order to do that, well, that's not a first in human history. I mean, that's something that if FDR is working with Stalin, okay, and Churchill at the same time, to win a war, clearly, when we're talking about a circumstance like this, where we don't have a Stalin, Putin is not Stalin, and you've got even hope for London there. You got some people there. So I think it's important what you said. I don't know if anybody else wants to say anything, but I very much appreciate that you called in and put some reality in this. Diane, you have anything you want to add?
No, thank you. Thanks for calling, Brian, and sorry about your loss.
Well, maybe. I mean, I'm not looking for sympathy. I'm looking for action.
No, but it's real. The point is you're making clear that it's very real, and people really should consider that.
And it's not a matter of, well, statistically speaking, it's the same number of people that die all the time, right? Great. Well, what does that mean? Why are any of these people ever dying? That's the whole point of what we're here to fight. That's the whole idea of what we're talking about in terms of a new culture, where you're not saying, well, yeah, it's true. We had a lot of suicides, but, I don't know. They could have actually been caused by COVID. Well, it's also true that we always have like 55,000 people who are overdosing on, opioids and, well, maybe we get to 53,000. That's what I mean. That's the evil of numbers. That's a good example of it. And so what you had to tell us is sobering and good. And we're going to fight. And I think you get the idea that we're going to fight. Thank you. Okay, you able to hear us?
Hi, Dennis. It's Fran from East Orange, New Jersey.
Good evening, Fran.
Yeah, how are you? I'm listening to this whole conversation tonight, and when I heard Diane mention about this man was in a room, he had the vaccine, and he was sharing some room with somebody that had COVID, I almost fell off my chair. That's my first statement. That should not be happening, where one person who may have had the vaccine should be sharing a room with someone that has COVID. I don't get that. That should not be happening. And another point I want to make, this, like the other day I was sitting down and I thought about something. We need some type of WPA program as far as infrastructure goes to rebuild or rehabilitate a lot of these closed hospitals. I'm looking here where I am in Essex County, between Essex and Union County, some hospitals that I used to do private duty, and I'm a retired nurse. I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 hospitals off the top of my head that have closed. Over here in Orange Memorial, the building is vacant and it's got ivy growing all over it. So if we want to put people back to work, I think there should be some type of a program where a lot of these places could be rebuilt, because I think it's absolutely necessary. When this COVID hit and they were converting places like putting tents in Central Park, making hospital beds in like the Javits Center, come on. We have buildings that are sitting vacant that should be reused again as the hospitals that they once were. It's just a matter of thinking and logistics. And as far as these people that don't think that COVID is real, and my condolences to the last caller, I have a best friend who's a funeral director that has the funeral home down the street. This is very real. My friend is telling me that they have to have certain appointments. They could only do X number of bodies and funerals per day on a very limited basis, and then they have to wait for the crematorium. And it's a problem with getting people cremated on a certain schedule. The crematoriums can only take X number of bodies per day. There's such a backup with this that it's ridiculous. So my last comment is get the vaccine. I had mine last Saturday. I was administering vaccines yesterday. So thank you, Dennis, and take care, everybody.
Okay, thank you, Fran. All right, so basically, thanks a lot. So basically, if you have something, Diane, on that, but we're at the end in any case, so maybe what we ought to do is take some final remarks from both you and Megan. Which one of you would like to go first?
I'll go first.
Okay.
Well, I didn't want to extend that particular discussion, but it's also just not true that there are no excess deaths. There are 380,000 excess deaths in the United States. So, but anyway, just generally, I think I want to come back to this theme of power and thinking, which are really the same thing, because what we're talking about is what is a physical principle that the formation of the American Republic was based on, and that Lyndon LaRouche advanced mightily with his discoveries in physical economics, which is that human beings are not animals. Human beings have, every human being, people in China, people in the United States, people in Tanzania, have the power of discovering something that you cannot know via your senses. And that is a universal physical principle. And discoveries of universal physical principles, for example, electromagnetism, the principles of the nucleus of the atom, these kinds of, and also cultural principles, which are just as concrete and physical as so-called scientific principles. These things not only transform civilization as such and give us new powers, new technologies, new, more powerful modes of existing, but they also change the universe itself. Before human beings came around, nuclear fusion did not take place on the surface of the Earth. So that kind of outlook and perspective for mobilizing the people of this country in alliance with people all over the world to get out of this crisis by creating something new, bringing civilization together around policies which embody a real physical principle that can provide a future for mankind. That's the kind of organizing that can really flank the evil that our enemies are attempting to carry out, in which they ultimately will not succeed in doing. But we really do have a big fight ahead of us. And just one final comment on the very first thing Dennis asked about Facebook. And Diane commented on this partly already, but I think, the idea that AI is being used to manipulate us, I think it's happening, but I think that it doesn't have to, in the sense that, artificial intelligence is not intelligent. It is based on mechanics. It's based on a fixed profile. So to the degree to which we are creative and are changing our profile and changing our changing our personality, in the sense that a scientist or a musician changes their personality as they develop more powerful ideas, I think that's really how we flank and outmaneuver that kind of situation.
Okay, thanks a lot. Diane?
Yeah, I just wanted to give one example of the difference between a scientific approach and an arbitrary approach designed to induce hysteria. They've done experiments, for example, in small towns in Italy, and I think they just started in Slovakia, where they decided to do mass testing, because part of the problem is people have a smell, they have a sense this is being used politically to manipulate people. It is. And I'll give you the example of the letter. JP Morgan Chase wrote a letter to their shareholders saying, well, we hope Biden gets in. This is not exactly the way it was worded, I'm sure, but we hope Biden gets in because we want a full lockdown. That will hurt the small businesses, and that will trigger a new round of quantitative easing. Do they care if the small businesses get loans? No. They just want trillions of dollars to keep their bubble afloat. Now, lockdowns at this point it is true, they are very damaging, and it's very difficult for people. People are isolated enough without being forced into isolation. Well, what if you had mass testing? Suppose you said, look, everyone is going to quarantine right now for 5 days, and then we're going to test everybody. And if you test positive, you're going to stay out of circulation for 2 weeks. And suppose we had enough housing that in households where one person tested positive and the others didn't, that person, like if you live with people who've had cancer, who are undergoing chemotherapy or have other comorbidities, you get out of the house. You go stay in a hotel, you get your food provided, you get paid for being off work. I think most people would actually volunteer to isolate themselves. So instead of locking down the entire population arbitrarily, you do mass testing of everyone. You find out who's carrying, who's infectious. They isolate, and the other people go about their business. Now, what would be so hard about that? But we're not doing that. And so that's where people get the sense of this manipulation and then react against everything. So, in keeping with partly what Megan said, this question of thinking, trust your ability to reason through a situation, but don't be lazy. Think it through. Think if you came to someone who had the exact opposite view that you do, could you prove what you are saying? Do you have a means of demonstrating that what you believe is true? And we have to get back to that level of rigor. And you definitely can't do that on Facebook or Twitter or Parler or anything else. You have to use your own mind. And I think it's time for all of us to get back in touch with our minds again and to share that spirit of playful thought and discovery with our friends, and we can organize the population.
Okay, well, thanks a lot. I think we did a pretty good job of stirring things up tonight. We had a lot of new people on and actually asking questions. And I just want to again encourage people to be with us on Saturday, where we'll have Harley Schlanger, Diane again, and Jason Ross. And we will be discussing this question of developing and producing the army of thinkers. Just to say one final word concerning where we stand in the United States today. Within probably about a week, the Biden administration is likely to collapse. Not in the sense that everybody's going to go home. They're definitely not going to do that. because now that they're there, they're going to try to take everything they can, as well as con everybody they can. However, the notion that people should feel the need, sort of like being a decent period of mourning, as they say, to sit around, don't do it. Think clearly and aggressively, because the idea here is we know what the injustice was that was committed. People who've been on our platform here have heard it many, many times. You've heard what we had to say about the vote. You've heard what we said about the idea of a citizens' commission for truth in elections. The Committee for the Coincidence of Opposites is a particular approach we are taking to this question of the new health platform that's to be done worldwide. And the work we do in the Schiller Institute, particularly on questions of culture, is exactly to go after the kind of cultural decline you saw exhibited kind of in lurid technicolor at the inauguration. So these are just some of the ways of expressing what it is we believe has to be done, which is that the United States population gets back in the job of self-government. That's what Lyndon LaRouche always stood for. His 8 presidential campaigns were all about that. So we want to thank all of you for being with us, but keep this in mind as we move ahead out of this, particularly with the Sare, the Senate campaign of 2022. We're also looking for the possibility of reproducing that same process nationally, whether that means candidacies or whether that means projecting the candidacy that we have nationally. We can see. But one thing was for certain, until people decide that the government is on their shoulders, and that the movement that they need is also on their shoulders, until they decide that, then we're not going to be able to know that the solutions that are offered to us are really our solutions. That's what we're asking to do. That's what we specialize in doing, and that's what we're asking you to join. Join that army of thinkers and join us in our deliberations tomorrow night, Saturday night, and of course here next week. On behalf of the LaRouche organization, we're going to say goodnight to you. Thanks for participating.
This session is no longer being recorded.